Welcome, everyone, to our monthly E3 Parent Summit. The purpose of our E3 Parent Summit is to engage with our families and equip them with practical resources that they can use and empower them to succeed on their journey in independent study with the Blue Ridge Academy. To help our session run smoothly today, here are a couple of requests that we have before we begin the presentation. Please, if you can, keep your microphones muted and your cameras off during the presentation. You are welcome to submit any questions you might have in the Q&A box, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. There will be time allotted at the end for a time of Q&A, so we'll be ready for that. Please note, this session will be recorded. So if you may have missed it, or if you're watching it right now, we thank you for joining us. But the recording will be available on our documentation for E3, and it's found in the Parent Information Center. That is our hub for all things Blue Ridge. Anything you need to find, any news or resources, go to the Parent Info Center. So that'll be provided there along with the slides and the resources that our presenter is going to share today. So you may be thinking, who am I? Well, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Anna Aguilar, and I am one of 3, almost 4, family liaisons here to support our families at the Blue Ridge Academy, along with Shannon Eves and Amanda Neve. We specialize in supporting our wonderful families with virtual resources, valuable workshops such as these, vendor support, and we also moderate all of our social media platforms for the Blue Ridge. And now, I'd like to introduce to you today our speaker this afternoon. This is Jamie Schmellenbeck. She has a lot of stuff that she would love to share with you, and she's going to do that today. So I'll let her begin sharing a little bit about herself. Take it away, Jamie.
Thank you so much, Anna. I love working with you as well as all of our family liaisons. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to my screen. All right. Anna, does that look right? Just make sure I'm sharing the right thing. All right.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. So we're here today to talk about modernizing homeschool approaches. Talking about all of the education philosophies and homeschooling philosophies is one of my absolute favorite things to do as an educator. But I wanted to kind of bring it into, well, 2025. We tend to reach back towards a lot of traditional methods that were developed 100 years ago or more. And a lot of those things are still valid and we're still using them and inspired by them every day. But the world is a different place, and it's time to put some modernized twist onto some of those. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to start out with reviewing some of those traditional educational philosophies, and then we're going to move into I want to say the more current trends in education and what has grown out of those traditional philosophies, specifically for homeschoolers, looking at culturally responsive pedagogies and holistic education, especially. And then I've got a list of resources for you, and we'll definitely save time for Q&A. All right, so before we jump in, I thought I'd share just a little bit about myself. Who am I and why am I talking to you today? I am the Assistant Director of Community Support here at Blue Ridge. This is this is my 3rd year as Assistant Director. My 7th year at Blue Ridge. I started out as an HST, actually just working part-time while my kids were in preschool, and you can see they're definitely not preschool age anymore. Then I was a regional coordinator for 2 years, and then I moved into administration. Before I came to Blue Ridge, I was actually home with my kids for about 2 years. Before that, I taught grades 3 and 4. It was an intentionally combined grade level where I looped with kids. I've also taught 6th grade, 5th grade, and kindergarten. I have a bachelor's degree in art with an art history concentration. I have a multiple subject credential and an administrative. I have a master's in educational leadership and almost a PhD in education at Claremont Graduate University that I'm finishing up this current year. All right, we're going to jump right into some of these educational philosophies, and I'm going to start out with one of the first, which is Charlotte Mason. And you may have heard of Charlotte Mason. You may have heard the word. but not really know what it is, or you might know a whole lot about it, depending on what you've chosen to do with your own kiddos. But I'm going to give a quick little review of what Charlotte Mason is and where it came from and why we're still talking about it today. So Charlotte Mason, this was the method is named after the woman. She was a British educator in the late 1800s. She wrote quite prolifically on education, both for in the classroom, at home, and at home. And a core of her whole philosophy is this quote here: "Education is an atmosphere, a discipline, and a life." And I think this is one of the first times we really start to see this idea of whole child or holistic education. Um, and I think this is one of the reasons why we tend to dip back into this one so often. So before I get going a little bit more into Charlotte Mason, I do have a quick little disclaimer. Her approach is faith-based. She does use the Christian Bible as part of her curriculum. So I'm not promoting this as one specific, faith-based method in any sense. I'm just trying to be true to what the method was. Um, However you choose to use or adopt it, obviously, is everyone's family's own choice. Oops, wrong button. All right, so her core principles from this method. First is that children are persons. Again, this is one of the first times we start to see this whole child type of ideology, because really at this time in like the late 1800s, children are better seen and not heard. So acknowledging that they're fully developed people that can be rational was probably a fairly radical thing. Her second principle was that the educator cooperates with God. And this is where I was giving my disclaimer. She really saw the educator as doing a very specific, almost missionary duty. Another core principle are these living ideas. You might hear a lot about living books when people talk about Charlotte Mason. And the idea is that the materials were high quality. They're really rich with complex ideas. And this is where today we might use the term rigor. And for her, she's talking about living ideas or a living environment. She believed in a liberal education, and by liberal, we mean broad, so that you're not just doing basic, letters, reading, math. That there really was a wide inclusion of subjects, history, geography, the sciences, nature study, and that education should instill a sense of wonder in children. There should be an integration of many things, not just the distilling down of just the basic reading and math. She believed that the environment was really critical to education. And by that, I don't mean just nature, but she talked about environment as as being one of the first teachers for a child, both inside the home and then exploring outside and in nature. She thought these spaces should be filled with books, natural elements, and opportunities to have experiences that the children could learn from. She also believed in habit training. So Charlotte Mason is one of those homeschooling approaches that's going to be highly structured. She really believed that having a set structure and a routine was a way to teach children responsibility and instill self-control. She uses a lot of copy work and dictation. Frequently, copy work would have been done with the Bible, which made, looking at print materials at this time, that would have been very common. This is certainly one of the most structured approaches for homeschooling methodologies. Oops, I keep clicking the wrong button. There we go. And then she also believed in specialized subjects. And again, this is where you would have the extension beyond the basic reading and math, that you'd be talking about history, fine arts, music, nature study, that there would really be this time and dedication and intention to be inclusive. This is certainly a departure from what many traditional schools might have been doing at the time. So if you're not super inspired yet, I would recommend checking out Build Your Library. This is a modern approach to Charlotte Mason's method. It's very literature-based and definitely nature-based, and it happens to be secular, so that's one that we can use here at Blue Ridge. So if you're ever interested in digging into Charlotte Mason a little bit more deeply, this is a great resource for you to kind of look at how you might use that today. And when you get a copy of all of these slides, you'll be able to click on these links as well. Okay, pros to Charlotte Mason. And there you'll see my daughter. This is when we were homeschooling when she was in first grade. So there are many curriculum guides available for Charlotte Mason. You can actually find a lot of help, a lot of blogs, a lot of how-tos. This is a really popular one, so resources are plentiful. Charlotte Mason wrote a whole series of books on home education, so you can even read her original words on how to homeschool. So there is an intentionality behind helping and supporting the homeschooling family. This is a method that is really great for kids who like to read. And I'll talk about that a little more in a second, but it tends to be fairly literature heavy, which I think is a good thing, but it does work well for those kiddos that you don't have to struggle to get them to read, that they're happy to pick up a book with you. It's really easy to limit screen time with Charlotte Mason. I do see that as a pro. You don't have to use technology unless you choose to, and how you want to incorporate that could be up to you. It's very easy to integrate subjects together. So you're doing your literature along with science or doing history along with visual arts. It's fairly simple to make everything blend together seamlessly and not feel like you're having to jump from one subject to a next and feel disconnected. Inclusion of arts, as someone with an art degree, I do always love when I see that. And as you see, we were painting here with some Van Gogh and some literature as well in that picture. So I always think that's a bonus when the arts is a natural inclusion and not something extra added on top later. And this is a method that can be as rigorous as you want it to be. So if you have a child who needs to accelerate, you can do that freely within this method. Or if you need to slow down a little bit and spend some more time on something, you have plenty of time for that too. So some cons. Not every method is perfect for everybody. So many of these curriculums are faith-based, and I'm not saying that's a con because it's faith-based, but it's because you can't use it with your public charter school funds. If you're purchasing something, it would have to be on your own dime. It can be heavy prep for the learning coach. So for the instructor, there could be a lot of work for you to do to get all of your materials together, to get things well planned out. There is an assumption with Charlotte Mason that kids will automatically learn through the process of reading and writing as they do copy work. This isn't always great for those who need differentiated approach to learning. If your child is one that language doesn't come easy to in the beginning, or if you have an identified learning disability, these can certainly be challenging approaches to use, and you'd have to access some more materials. There is an ongoing hunt for more materials, and once you've been homeschooling for a while, you might find that curriculum gets addicting. So if you're using an approach that means you're constantly out looking for more books, more resources, you can really find yourself spending too much too quickly. And then I think my last thing with this particular method is that it can be fairly rigid. It's highly structured in its method and its content, and you might feel a little bit trapped. But it might also be a comfort. So I think, again, this was my opinion on the pros and cons. All right, coming up next. Oh, that all clicked through faster than I wanted it to. All right. We have Montessori. There are Montessori schools all over the place. They're very common for early childhood education. Montessori was developed by Dr. Maria Montessori in 1907 in Italy. She was a doctor of pediatrics and psychiatry. And she was one of the first to really make education child-centered. She really believed in self-directed learning and that children could move along at their own pace. She saw that teachers shouldn't be delivering knowledge or shouldn't be delivering the learning to the students or transmitting it, but really the teacher was there just to be a facilitator, there to provide guidance, to set up the environment in the right way, and then the child will direct themselves to what they are ready to learn. So again, self-directed learning in this method, you have to have a well-prepared environment that is ready to be explored, where a child can choose what they're going to work on and work on those things at their own pace. The environments are intended to be really beautiful, really clean, well organized. Classroom spaces feel like a home. They're orderly, and they're really specially designed to engage students and to help them kind of make selections on what they're going to learn and how they're going to progress through what the options are that have been presented to them. Montessori is well known for being multi-sensory. It's a lot of hands-on materials that are designed to be attractive. They should ideally be self-correcting. So a child should be able to, let's say, complete a puzzle, and they should know whether or not they've completed it successfully or correctly by the time that they're done with it. It shouldn't need an adult to tell them how to do it or to fix it for them or to tell them if they've done it correctly. There is a belief that a child should be interacting repeatedly with a concept, and that's how they're going to learn, is through that interaction and through that ongoing repetition. One of the great things about Montessori is it's also designed intentionally for mixed ages. So you're going to encourage children, the mixed ages is going to encourage children to learn from each other. And olders can support littles can inspire the older ones to maybe try something they had skipped over earlier. And I think the nice thing about mixed ages, and when I taught in a mixed age environment myself, I loved that it respects the variation in development, right? So every 8-year-old is not going to be exactly the same. Some might need more time with reading, some might need to accelerate in math. And when you have a mixed age group, it's very easy just to focus on teaching every child where they are rather than where they should be at one specific age range or age. Okay. So let me click, there we go. All right. Some pros about Montessori. It's student-centered. For me, this is always a pro. It emphasizes following student choices from the research and things that we know about motivation, whether it's adults or children. Being able to make a choice is a significant factor in being intrinsically motivated to do the learning and to do the activity. It is well aligned with child development. And this was new science at the time for Maria Montessori. And the fact that it's respecting where the child is and following that natural timeline and progression is setting up for success. It's very easy to accelerate or slow down, especially with those mixed age groups. It's very flexible, and you can have multiple ages together, which I think is fantastic, especially if you're homeschooling and you have multiple kiddos at home with you. It's really easy to make that work. Cons. This is the big one, is that it's really ideally designed for classroom use. It's very difficult, I think, even both as a homeschooler, as an educator, to set up for Montessori successfully at home. Not saying it can't be done. I have never figured it out. So if you are someone who has, I would love to hear from you. But there's a need for a lot of materials and a lot of hands-on items, which can be very expensive, and you might only use them for a short time. And this is why I'm saying it's more ideal for a classroom where you would have more access to those kinds of materials and be able to, reuse them. There are limited homeschooling guides specifically for Montessori. They're harder to find, not that they're not out there. I think it's a little bit more challenging to really be authentic 100% Montessori. And it can be very high prep because you're constantly needing to prepare a lot of materials that the child's going to be able to walk themselves through. Okay. That's not to say Maria Montessori, her methods are extremely successful, and then you can see that by all of the availability of Montessori schools that are around. And they do have programs that go for all the way from early childhood all the way up even through high school. They're not as common, but they are out there. All right, the next method, which is also very popular, especially in the homeschooling world, is Waldorf. I had a particular love of Waldorf for a little bit. I think it's just so beautiful, um, which is one of its pros. So Waldorf came from a man by the name of Rudolf Steiner in 1919. He was in Germany, and he had designed the specific method for factory workers that were working in the Waldorf Astoria cigarette factory for their children. Um, this was emerging as you look at that year out of World War II. So picture World War II, Germany. Everybody's been through, well, a lot. And he was really looking for a way to bring some type of peace and calm to these factory workers and to their children. So there's a lot of emphasis on the humanness and a calm or a need for a calm at that time. And I think his method really reflects that. Steiner was a big speaker and philosopher. He came up with something called anthroposophy, and I never know if I'm saying that right. And this was his own specific philosophy about holistic education. And it's really when we start to see some solidified ideas of what holistic education should be. We started to see that with Charlotte Mason. We see it a little bit with Maria Montessori and her sticking closely with child development. And now we see this full-blown educational philosophy. And he believes that education should be about the mind, the heart, and the hands. And that is something that is still repeated in Waldorf schools today. And it's really interesting to see how much of their method and the technique and the materials always speak to mind, heart, and hands. He did base his method on his own observations of child development. Again, he wasn't a doctor like Maria Montessori, but he did really try to hone in on who are children and where are they in these various stages. And he kind of came up with his own stages of child development. He believed that schools and education should be co-governed by teachers. He really wanted teachers to have an active voice. He respected their training and their value. And he wanted to always incorporate the arts with academics. As you can see, that's my little gnome drawing of our math gnomes. We told a lot of math stories with the classic Waldorf gnomes to help us to understand really everything. The arts was a key to all components, and I think it's part of why Waldorf always looks so beautiful. I have two links here. These are both Blue Ridge Charter School approved resources. Oak Meadow is a full-blown curriculum that goes from, I know, kindergarten, possibly TK, all the way through high school. That is founded in Waldorf, but it's kind of got a modern spin on it. But it's a very gentle curriculum, and I think it really takes that mind, heart, hands philosophy and blends it through their curriculum nicely. There's also this tiny little book called the Waldorf Homeschool Handbook. It's really a quick little read. I just discovered it's out of print, so if you can find a used copy or find it at your library, it's a great little resource on just how to do it at home. What does an average day look like? I found it to be very helpful. All right, pros and cons of Waldorf. There's my daughter knitting. I think that was a big pro. She was actually knitting this morning. Like I said before, Waldorf is beautiful. There's something about their watercolors, the imagery, the drawings, the emphasis on, the chalk drawings and the pastels. I think they're just gorgeous. And this integration of the visual arts, music, and handwork make for a very well-rounded education. And I appreciate that all of those things are considered just as important as history and science and math. Because I think those are the things where we get to celebrate our humanness oftentimes. There are a lot of resources available for Waldorf. A lot of curricula have been printed and prepared. So Oak Meadow is just one example. You can find a lot of examples online. One of the things that I love about Waldorf is that it is a gentle curriculum, but it also has rigor. So it really pulls from that living book idea or living materials idea from Charlotte Mason, but maintains this calm, gentle approach. All right, so what are the cons? Now, as somebody who has used Waldorf, there are a few reasons why I gave it up. So I probably interspersed some of my own opinion here. You can certainly disagree with me if, this is not an issue for you. You can let me know. But this anthroposophy philosophy has gotten to be pretty outdated. I have tried and tried to read it. Well, I can read it. I just don't know that I agree with it. I think we have learned a lot more about child development and about human development that I think is more helpful in how we uh, design and create learning experiences for children. Um, the recommended stories, first grade is Grimm's fairy tales, are not always the greatest literature. And that's not to say there isn't good literature in Waldorf and that you couldn't use some. Um, but there is an adherence to some of those traditions that I think are not always the best examples. So if you've ever read a Grimm's fairy tale out loud, one of the originals, I will tell you, it's not easy. It's not the best flow of language, and they tend to have a lot of plot structure issues. Like a story starts off over here and you end up, I don't know, in a completely other place that with totally different characters than you started with. And you're not really getting that plot structure, story structure that you might want to be introducing to children. And I know the literature does change from, one grade to the next. So I think there are some things that do get better, but that's one of my chief complaints. But my other issue with some of the literature that they recommend is it's not always culturally relevant. So it made a lot of sense for Waldorf. He was and Rudolf Steiner. They were working over here in Germany. So pulling on these Grimm's fairy tales, these are 100% culturally relevant, right? But for us in Southern California, well, we don't really have a forest to go out and get lost in. And these stories don't reflect all of our cultures and heritages. So it doesn't always speak to who we are and what we might want to be passing on to our children. One of the challenges with Waldorf is they recommend you only teach one grade level at a time. So you'd be doing your main block lesson with one child individually and then setting them up to do something by themselves and then moving on to child number 2 and then maybe moving on to child number 3. That's a whole lot to plan. And that's a lot of work to get through in your day. It's not that it can't happen, but it is challenging. There can be a lot of rigidity or concern in Waldorf about, am I doing it right? And, struggle because it is so well known. There are Waldorf training centers for teachers. There are complete Waldorf schools. So there can be a lot of angst over, am I getting it right? Am I doing it right? How can I do this better? That can be fairly stressful. And again, like it's a lot of preparation. So just some things to caution if you choose to dive into the world of Waldorf, it can be a bit consuming, having done it myself. All right, so what's happening while all of those things are going on over in Europe, in the US? Well, we were having the Common Schools movement, which started in the mid-1800s. You may have heard the names Horace Mann and Catherine Beecher, sister of Harriet Beecher Stowe, who really pioneered our current public education system. They wanted something that was publicly funded, that was standardized, and it was basic education for all. It really was an equity thing to make sure that all kids were having access to the same quality education that really was hit or miss across the country at this time. They wanted to promote social stability, and the goal was to prepare citizens to participate in our democratic government. We wanted literate, well-educated people who could make good decisions. It was also used to Americanize immigrants, Native Americans, and to not just bring standards to the education in terms of can you read and can you do math, but really as a cultural standardizer. Also at the same time, we had the progressive education movement happening. And this was a little bit later after the Common Schools movement. You have John Dewey, who's really the big name for progressive education in the early 1900s. I also threw in the name Jean Piaget there. You might also hear the name Vygotsky. These were big social psychologists or psychiatrists that specialized in child development and understanding how children learn that continue to influence education today. John Dewey, his whole idea was that children should learn by doing. Does that sound a little familiar? Like a lot like Montessori, a lot like Charlotte Mason, that we should be experiencing what we are attempting to learn and to introduce to children. There is a big push for social interaction as a key to learning. He thought that classrooms should be communities of inquiry. We're doing science experiments. We're engaging in exploring nature to understand it. He wanted to promote active engagement and student-centered learning, a lot of like what we've already talked about, and not just this passive passive receiving of information that a teacher is just giving to you. He really wanted children to be involved in their own learning process. And there is a lot more cognitive science now that we have available that teaches us that when we are actively engaged, when we are connected socially with a community of learners, that we're developing deep knowledge and understanding. And again, to go along with that, the teacher is the facilitator, like we've seen in some of these early methodologies. All right, so that, oops, I feel like my little clicker went out of order there. Sorry about that. All right, and so that brings us to where we are today. This progressive education movement has come and gone. There's always been this push and pull of, this traditional classroom setup of everybody in rows, but maybe we should have everybody in groups and get them talking to each other and get them interacting. And what we've moved into today is what's termed culturally sustaining pedagogy. So pedagogy just meaning an instructional approach. And the whole idea here is that we see children, and we see all learners, adults as well, as being capable of constructing understanding and knowledge for themselves. It's an asset-based approach. Whereas, if we were looking at the Common Schools movement, there was more of the deficit-based approach of like children are empty vessels and we have to fill them up. We need to give them the knowledge and they need to receive it. A culturally sustaining pedagogy, much like Dewey said, much like Charlotte Mason said, is that children are whole people, that they are really ready to engage and construct knowledge for themselves. We want to honor diversity of culture, diversity of language, diversity of literacies, and different ways of knowing that each person has value. In a culturally sustaining pedagogy, there is an interconnected lens through which we engage learners in the values that we want them to develop, in their own histories that they come from, and their learning goals. All of those things are connected together. There is no one formula. You must teach in this way and then it will work. Really, you have to take all of those pieces and put them together to come up with an approach that's going to work for your student. Culturally sustaining pedagogies are embodied. This is about the educator and the deep work that an educator needs to do to reflect on their own practices, their own background, where they're coming from, what values they have, and how they're going to connect with their learner. I love this quote from Parker Palmer: "We teach who we are." So who you are, that is how you're going to teach. So there's a lot of work that we do as the adult to pause and to understand our own approach. And then culturally sustaining pedagogy is always fluid. It's never one method. It's never, if I just do Waldorf just right, it'll be perfect. Your pedagogy, your approach to education is going to change because you change, your child changes. We grow and we evolve and we adapt. And we have to continue to be willing to pivot and be flexible with what needs arise. All right, and then that brings me to holistic education. Holistic education really falls under that umbrella term of culturally sustaining pedagogy, but it is considered an approach now all unto itself. I'm sorry, I'm going to move my little camera here out of the way for my little video. Holistic education is an integration of the idealistic ideas of humanism. It is sorry, my screen is stuck. It is philosophical idea that incorporates the principles of spirituality, incorporates wholeness and an interconnectedness, along with the ideas of freedom, autonomy, and democracy. And we're hearing a lot of these phrases sort of repeat. It really is a modern synthesis of many of those ideas we've already talked about. If you read any uh, modern day academic research on holistic education and how it gets implemented, they're all referencing Montessori, Charlotte Mason, Waldorf, and these origins. And that's why it took some time to really go through those, because those ideas are still in use today in private schools and public schools by educators around the world. We're just calling them something different, which was part of the idea of this presentation today, was to really harness some of that language and vocabulary. So I've linked down here for you. There's a case study article if you're really super into academic reading, but it has a really good synthesis of what holistic education is. There's also a website there for holistic education that really breaks it down, and some resources there too. And here you see my daughter. She's working on her word study with a bunny, because really, I mean, life has to be about choices and doing things in a way that brings you joy. And incorporates all of who you are. All right, so core principles of holistic education. And the first one is wholeness and authenticity. And what they mean by this is there is a reverence for life and a reverence for nature. There is an interconnectedness of our human selves and being authentic to who we are. Next is freedom and democracy. This is recognizing and promoting the unique meaningfulness of each individual, their lived experience, the importance of relationships that are loving, that move towards freedom and autonomy and democratic principles. And then they use the word caring as one of their core, core principles. I wish there was a different word that they use here, because a lot of this concept is about relationships. It's about compassion and compassionate learning through connection with schools and homes and your wider community. It's really about this integration of all of these spaces as what you might imagine is a big interconnected spider web or an ecosystem that we need to take care of all of those communities that we are a part of. The fourth principle is transformative, that learning is not transmission, not that empty vessel that you're just waiting to absorb what somebody tells you to learn, but really it's transforming the person through their engagement as a whole student. And that really connects with that John Dewey constructivist ideology of like students need to engage, they need to be active in their own learning, and the learning needs to be student-centered. The next principle is that it is flexible. If this was a classroom, classrooms are open and they are changing for you at home. This is really about formative processes, not about taking a test, did you do it? But how can I go through an activity and experience it and play with that idea to learn it for myself. It's really about those flexible creative processes that we go through to build new knowledge. The sixth principle is that it is transdisciplinary. This is where we heard about, Charlotte Mason and all of her specialized subjects. This is about, Waldorf integrating the arts into all of his subject matters. There is an interconnection of curriculum through history and the arts and your language and your science, so that things aren't fragmented into separate disciplines that are done in isolation and separate books. That really this can be the project-based learning that incorporates multiple ideas and multiple learning objectives all together. Okay, so how do we do this? Because it's a lot. Holistic education really is about empowerment. You want to look about learning. You want to look at learning outcomes. What is it that your goal is for the student to learn? And then you look at your implementation and how am I going to get there? So if your goal is to gain knowledge in specific content areas, you're looking at engagement with big questions, big inquiry guided focuses, like, if there's a theme, that pulls from your social studies or history, or a theme that pulls from literature, and you can turn that into a question for the student that they can explore. If your learning outcome is intellectual and practical skills, right? Think about writing skills. Writing is an art and a craft. There's also some very concrete skills. How do you incorporate that? Well, you integrate it across your curriculum. It's not just writing alone in a grammar book, but maybe it's incorporated into your social studies, into writing about your science experiment, that there is a structure that's deeply embedded, and there's many opportunities for them to practice it. And it progressively just gets more challenging. And the expectation there is that you're always using those skills and you're constantly improving them. If your learning outcome is personal and social responsibility, this is where you can be actively engaged in the real world. This is why we love homeschooling, right? Because we can be out and engaging in real life and real world problems. And then if your learning outcome is to integrate and apply your new learning, that new knowledge, this can be demonstrated in a lot of ways, not just a test or a standardized exam or a multiple choice, that we do have the opportunity to apply that knowledge in a new context. Maybe it's a new piece of writing. Maybe that's a new project. Maybe it's a presentation. Maybe it's designing something completely unique. All right. So this was not my graph, so please excuse me for it's a little bit of like craziness. But I did like that. It's a nice breakdown for how to think about designing for active learning. We want our children to be actively engaged and as a whole person in their learning. This is a nice little breakdown of how to do that. You look at your seed. What's your input, right? So this could be from the teacher, or it could be from the students. This is your content that you're working with, right? There's some type of direction. There's some type of visual model, inquiry, question. And then you would think about, okay, now what is my student going to do with this input? How are they going to interact with it? Is it going to pull from previous knowledge? What kind of resources might they use? How are they going to experience this and begin to construct their own understanding? And then how are you going to check for understanding? How do I know what they learned? Is it just that they finished that worksheet, or is there more to it? This could be a formative process. So this might be something that they're creating and expressing, whether that's in writing, whether it's in art, whether it's dictating to you to explain to you what they learned and what they understood. And that obviously depends on the age and depends on how much time you want to spend on this particular thing. It could be something very small. And it could just be, tell me, as a summary, explain to me what your science experiment was. But it also could be, something much bigger depending on the need. But I thought this was a nice way to break down how do you do that active learning? How do you plan for that for your own student? This is another concept, and granted, you could spend an entire college semester on backward design. But this is a principle where you start with what is the learning goal. So like back here when I was talking about those learning outcomes, what is it that I need for my student to learn? Grounding that in this blue circle in your values. Who are you as an educator? Who are you as a teacher? Why are you teaching in this way? And how are you going to get your student from point A to point B? There's a great example in a textbook that talks about, when we, start school in the fall and everybody does, a whole unit on apples. We do apple tasting, we look at apple colors, we do apple coloring books, and it's like, okay, well, why do we do apples? Well, it's fall. I'm like, okay, but why? Are we doing an activity just because it's a favorite activity? Or are we doing it because we have a deeper learning objective there? Did we want students to learn something deeply about fall? Are we really studying science? Or what's going on there? So we need to be mindful of not just cherry picking things that look cute and look fun and look because they seem like the right thing to do at that time of year. But are we really planning on designing content and designing lessons around our values and around our students' bigger learning outcomes? There's a great book I can recommend to you, or I think I put it in here. Understanding by Design. It's definitely more textbooky and it's big and fat, but it really walks through this whole idea of how do you design a unit of study really from what do I need my students to know first, and then working backwards on, and now how am I going to get there, which makes a lot of sense. So I've included a whole bunch of resources here for you, ones that I linked in earlier slides just to make it easier. So there's Dr. Montessori's handbook. There's the American Montessori Society, which has a lot of resources in there as well, that homeschooling handbook. Oh, I just realized I put that in there twice. I will correct that because there was a different link I wanted to give you. Um, Here's the build your library curriculum, as well as the Oak Meadow curriculum. These are both very gentle, and I think they do a nice way of speaking holistically to children and building on a lot of those core principles without really making you feel beholden to following those absolutely. There's a lot of other ways you can add to them and pull from them. But those are just some of my favorites that I wanted to share, but there's a world of resources out there for you. And now I'm happy to stop talking. And if anybody has any questions, I would be more than happy to chat with you for a little bit.
And I believe that we have a good enough group where if you would like to ask a question, you can either put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask a question. Again, just please keep it concise. That way we can get to others. But oh my gosh, Jamie, I'll tell you one of the points that I really appreciate, because I hear this from lots of parents. The fact that you said that we could change curriculum as your student grows from year after year. I think some people feel like, oh, I have to be dedicated to this all the way through.
Yeah.
I don't, because kids change and their minds change, or they decide something different. And that's also part of the structure of this. It's like follow them where their discovery is. So thank you for kind of giving permission, even though you didn't have to. But it's about that. It's about saying like where the kids are interested, where their interests are, allow them to lead. So thank you.
And I
That
was
was a
really
good point.
hoping to emphasize that actually more. And I meant to put in here, I had a photo. There's my daughter. Oh my gosh, this is this summer. She's about to turn 12. And a bunch of those pictures we were homeschooling. And let me tell you, I had all kinds of ideas about how homeschooling was going to go. And I'm an educator, right? Like I'm a well-trained teacher. I know what I'm doing. Thought I was going to run in here with all my Waldorf and nature study and everything. And let me tell you, by February, it had all turned upside down, because that wasn't ideally what was working for her. And now as my 12-year-old, she's getting ready to go to like in-person public middle school because that's what she needed. She begged me to go to school. So it turned out to be a very different journey than what I envisioned, and that's okay.
Wonderful. We're going to get to our first question with a hand up. Stephanie Morris, go ahead and unmute yourself and you can ask a question.
Hi, thank you. I was wondering, kind of along the same lines as what you guys were just discussing, as far as changing curriculum and, as your kids grow, how do you know when to sort of, I guess, give up on a curriculum or a certain technique or something? I know there's times where I feel like I haven't given it enough chance, but
Yeah.
also, if it is something that I need to change, like, how do you make that decision?
Yeah, that's a hard one, because you want to give it enough time, right, to see how it goes. So I think there's a couple things in there. It could be, let's see, if you were brand new to homeschooling, or let's say this is your child is young, right? You might be trying to figure out what works best for them. Um, so it feels like anything you try might not be the right fit because you just don't know yet. So I would give it at least 3 months. You think about like not a semester, but like a quarter's worth of a traditional classroom, right? To really try something and to play with it. And then it gives you some time to think critically about it. Is it the presentation that's not working? Is it the organization of it that doesn't work? Is it just the wrong method, a wrong approach altogether? I would say a minimum of 3 months. Usually I can tell if like, this just isn't a good fit. I would also say if your child's really like fighting it, there are certain things like I will say my daughter at first grade, she hated writing, right? Obviously, I knew she knew how to write, and I knew that that was not something I'm going to let go. So just because Waldorf included some writing and she had to write a couple of sentences a day, I wasn't going to let that go. That was just, I'm going to require that because as the adult, I know that's what we need to do. But if there are other parts where they're really fighting you on it, let's say it's nature study, and they just hate it. It's like, well, okay, we could do science another way. You know, if you spent 3 months, 6 months turning yourself upside down to make this nature study approach work, and they're not having joy, you're not seeing that joy and that fun, then I would say, okay, now it's time to kind of maybe pause and let's shift gears a little bit, and reflect on why we chose this, and what kind of shift can we make to make this work, or to shift to something entirely different. I don't know if that answers your question, because there's a lot of possibilities in there.
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
And we had a question in the comments. Just quickly going over, what were the curriculums you went over? It says, can you go over the 4?
So the first one was
do you want me
Charlotte Mason. She was first chronologically, then Montessori, then Waldorf, and then an umbrella term really is culturally sustaining pedagogies, and within that is holistic education, along with a bunch of others. But holistic is a nice big umbrella term that incorporates a lot of things.
Yes, and questions were asked if slides are going to be available, and that is correct. They will be available. You will locate it in the Parent Information Center under Family Liaisons, and then E3 Parent Summit. E3 right there, right behind me. You look at this there, and then you'll find all of them. You'll find lots of other recordings that we've done too, along with slides that, again, you can look back at them and use the resources. The links will be live, so you can go to open up those links as needed. Let me look for more questions. I think there are some. If you want, you're welcome to raise your hand as well. Let me see.
This is like by far one of my favorite topics to talk about, so I'm happy to happy to chat. And there's a lot of other approaches in here we didn't even get to because I had to kind of pick and choose. So obviously, like, I could talk forever. But I think these were kind of the main, like, linear ones that really line up in terms of developing that holistic approach, that whole child approach that so many of us really are here for.
Absolutely. Last but not least, I wanted to make sure, thank you all for joining us. We're still here to answer questions, but in the meantime, just wanted to look at the last slide. Again, our E3 summits are monthly, the 3rd Wednesday of every month. And so you're welcome to join us. It's at 3 p.m. Come on, it's like 3. Very, very, very easy to remember. We would ask if you would please take a moment to scan the QR code, and that is just a virtual event survey asking how you felt this presentation went, and it gives you room to add any other presentations that you feel might be helpful for parents to continue to be educated with. So believe me, our eyes and ears are open. We love to know what our parents need and how we can support you. So I can try to get the QR code inside the chat. But again, it also, when I do send out these slides, there is the link, a hyperlink there as well. So you'll have that. I just want to invite you next month, though. Next month, which is November, as we're getting into more of the seasons, we are doing something new that we've never done before. We are asking families at Blue Ridge to share a traditional or family cultural dish. Now, how do we do it over Zoom? We are just asking them to share a recipe, which we will put on our slide, and then you will show the dish to our families. And we're going to ask some questions like, where did this come from? Where did it start from? And what tradition did it stem from? And how do you continue it? So you get to share about your families, about this dish, and what it means to you and your culture. So we would love for you to come next month. If you have a dish that you would love to share and a recipe that you don't mind sharing as well, we would love to have that. But we'll continue. We still have one more question. So thank you so much. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Sorry, I was just wondering,
Keep going.
do you have a recommendation, or does it matter, age differences when you're trying to incorporate multiple levels all together? Like, is there a certain point where it's just kind of like, well, they're too spread apart, or is there certain subjects that you wouldn't recommend trying to incorporate more than one level?
That's good. A good question. So there's lots of things that lend themselves fairly easily to teaching to multiple levels together. And I tend to think of like the liberal arts that way. So doing your read aloud, some of your literature, doing history, a lot of those, especially if kids are fairly close together, you can kind of teach everybody together. And when I was in the classroom and the entire school was on intentional multi-age groupings that we looped with, we did all divide up for math, because that was really the one where, we were on grade levels and like really there, wherever you are on fractions, we don't want to just keep repeating the same concept about fractions. Eventually, the older kids are ready to move on. So definitely math is the one where I'm like, everybody kind of needs their own, especially the older that they get. And then I think the rest, yeah, it sort of depends on what ages you're starting at. So the younger they are, the easier it is to kind of keep them all together. Um, as they get to like middle school, I feel like studies get more in depth, more specific. They need more independent time. There's a lot more genuine independent work and independent study going on, where I think they kind of need a path of their own. I think it's about developing a nice rhythm in your day. And I think that's where I love that Waldorf homeschooling handbook, because that's what it did. It really talked about how to design your day around multiple kiddos and from start to finish. Like, you don't need to try to replicate a school day in your house. It could really have a much more natural rhythm to how life flows, from morning to evening. So you kind of have to think about who you have, where they are, where you're starting from, to kind of jump off there and then make some decisions about what works to do together. Does that help?
It does, yeah. I have 3 kids, and so my older 2 boys are 5th and 6th grade, and then my daughter is in 2nd grade. So it was just a little more challenging to try and incorporate the 2nd grader in with our
Yeah.
lessons. And I was given advice from other homeschool moms, and like history and science. Those are always easy to group everyone together, and it just seemed like it was just enough of a separation. I wasn't sure if she was able to
Yeah,
follow
I think I would
everything.
have a hard time. I would have a hard time with that. Like, yeah, 2nd grade is still pretty little. They're still kind of in that concrete, stage. 3rd grade, 4th grade is really when you see that transition with more abstract thinking, really getting a lot deeper, in the social meanings of things. A little more philosophical, more inferential thinking, critical thinking. Yeah, so 2nd grade, I might kind of do their own thing. And then maybe a 5th and 6th grader, you could kind of blend some of those a little more easily together.
Well, we did get a comment from Lorena just saying how she had difficulty choosing a curriculum, but she and her student are following the I can statements, and it's been helpful to go through that as well. So, any advice that we can kind of share with one another on how we're doing, I mean, that's wonderful. So thank you for sharing, Lorena.
Yeah, and that's absolutely what, we would be doing if we had a classroom to run, right? Like, you start with those I can statements and you build your lesson plans around it. You find the big ones and you're like, how can I build around this and maybe incorporate some others? I can take in this science study and then I'm going to build in some writing and we're going to add some art and we're going to add this piece of history about this particular science topic. And you can really blend them together nicely.
Well, thank you so much. If we don't have any further questions, this will conclude our presentation today. Jamie, thank you so much. It needs to come from someone who is super passionate, who has tried a lot of these methods, and who always seeks to try something new and innovative. And I'm so glad that Blue Ridge supports this type of learning for parents and for students. And, there's so much more we can do. So parents, thank you so much for joining us today. And we are always here to support you. So if you ever need support or questions or resources, we are family liaisons. You can locate our services and our support at family liaisons at theblueridgeacademy.com. You can call the helpline and our number, press our number for family liaisons and you'll get us. So we're so happy to support you and be with you. We hope to see you next month. Yummy, yummy. To share our cultural dishes. And so thank you so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful October.